While the fall of Jerusalem in 586 BCE and the deportation of Judah's citizens throughout Babylon fundamentally altered the trajectory of Jewish civilization, it was not the official end of its influence. What had been a territorially anchored kingdom became known as the province of Yehud, and the origin of a dispersed community navigating life under a dominant foreign power. The exiled Judeans were concentrated primarily in urban Babylonian centers along the Euphrates, including Babylon itself, Nippur, and other provincial towns. Records suggest that Jewish exiles were granted plots of land. The Al-Yehuda archive contains legal contracts, leases for land, tax receipts, and agreements for the delivery of crops like barley and dates, showing that instead of being prisoners, the Jews likely operated as state-dependent farmers that paid taxes to the Babylonians. Without the temple in Jerusalem, the exiled population had to preserve religious cohesion through other methods. A form of proto-synagogues began developing, centers for communal gathering, prayer and instruction, with religious leadership beginning to shift away from the previously exclusive duty of the priesthood to include scribes and prophets. Exiles participated in trade, crafts, and administration, and some attained positions of modest influence, though always subordinate to the imperial hierarchy. However, only 24 years after the fall of Jerusalem, Babylon began to decline. After the death of Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon experienced internal instability combined with external pressure. When the Babylonian king Nabonidus disrupted traditional religious hierarchy by elevating the moon god Sin above Marduk, it fractured the kingdom with religious tension. In the east, the kingdom of Persia was rapidly expanding. Cyrus II, Cyrus the Great, became ruler of the Persians around 559 BCE, and within a single decade united the Medes and Persians and began expanding westward, eventually arriving at Babylonian borders. Persian forces defeated Babylonian troops at the Battle of Opis and captured Nabonidus, allowing them to take over with minimal destruction. The Persians adopted a policy of relative tolerance towards subject peoples and their religions. Within a year of the conquest, King Cyrus enacted the Edict of Cyrus, permitting deported populations to return to their ancestral lands and rebuild their temples. The Cyrus cylinder, discovered in 1879 by Hormuzd Rassam, records this decree. This edict was not explicitly for the Jewish population, but for any people assimilated into the Babylonian Empire. Ezra records, "Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth. Whoever is among you of all his people, may his God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, and rebuild the house of the Lord." The first wave of return took place approximately 538 to 520 BCE. Ezra records that the whole assembly together was 42,360, besides their male and female servants. However, archaeological and demographic estimates suggest the population of Yehud in the early Persian period was approximately 20,000 to 30,000. Archaeological layers in late 6th century Jerusalem point to a sparse population and limited construction, suggesting that a large majority of the Jews living in Babylon remained behind. With Jerusalem destroyed, the Judeans who returned began a long process of reconstruction. According to Ezra, a Persian-appointed Judean named Sheshbazzar was made governor of the province and head of reconstruction. The workers first restored the sacrificial altar before beginning construction of the temple itself. Regional pressure halted construction. Then the people of the land discouraged the people of Judah and made them afraid to build. Construction appears to have stalled for 15 to 20 years, while focus shifted to rebuilding residential homes. In about 520 BCE, the prophet Haggai rebuked the Judeans. "Is it a time for you yourselves to be living in your paneled houses, while this house remains a ruin?" Building resumed under the governor Zerubbabel, when a Persian governor named Tatanai questioned the legitimacy of the project. King Darius searched the royal archives and located the decree by Cyrus confirming authorization. Darius issued another decree allowing the temple access to imperial funding. 4 years, 5 months, and 10 days later, the temple was completed in 516 BCE, 70 years after the destruction of the first temple. Rare personal sealings appeared during the Zerubbabel-Darius reconstruction phase tied to temple supply administration. The earliest seal impressions contain Aramaic script. The most notable are the Elnathan Bullae, a series of clay seals belonging to a governor named Elnathan, possibly tied to the late 6th century BCE administration under Darius. Another 71 years would pass before the construction of Jerusalem's walls was completed. Earlier attempts were halted after officials warned King Artaxerxes that the Judeans would rebel if allowed to refortify the city. The work was stopped by force. The cupbearer of the king, Nehemiah, later implored the king to allow him to return home and rebuild the city. By 445 BCE, Persia faced threats from Greece and Egypt, and a fortified loyal Jerusalem provided a stable military buffer. With the city reconstructed, we see a spike in clay seals, signifying the city's incorporation into Persian trade networks. Local administration consolidated with taxation, tribute delivery, and temple oversight, becoming formalized. Under Persian rule, Yehud remained a small province of the Achaemenid Empire. The Second Temple served as the central religious institution. Priests and scribes managed cultic, legal, and educational functions. The Torah, now finalized and codified, formed the basis for civic and religious life. By the late 5th and early 4th centuries BCE, the Persian Empire faced structural strain. Regional revolts required repeated military campaigns, and weakening royal authority led to satrapal insubordination. Some satraps hired foreign mercenaries, struck their own coinage, and challenged the authority of the Persian king. Simultaneously, decades of conflict with mainland Greece had exposed vulnerabilities in the Persian military. Philip II of Macedon began preparing an invasion, building a reformed military system centered around the Macedonian phalanx, equipped with the long pike known as the sarissa. Upon his death, his son Alexander the Great committed himself to fulfilling his father's plans. In 334 BCE, Alexander crossed the Hellespont into Anatolia and secured victory at the Battle of the Granicus. In 333 BCE, his army routed the forces of Darius III at the Battle of Issus, leaving the Levant exposed. Alexander continued south along the eastern Mediterranean coast, securing fortified cities including Tyre and Gaza. Yehud appears to have submitted, and Macedon took control of the province in 332 BCE. In 331 BCE, Alexander defeated Darius III again at the Battle of Gaugamela, ending Achaemenid resistance. Under Macedonian rule, Yehud, now called Judea, experienced an administrative transition. Persian satrapal authority was replaced with Macedonian military governors. Greek began appearing alongside Aramaic in administration, and taxation flowed through military administrators rather than temple institutions. When Alexander the Great died in 323 BCE, he left no mature heir capable of ruling his empire. His generals carved the empire into competing monarchies in the Wars of the Diadochi. Judea became a contested region between the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt and the Seleucid Empire of Syria and Mesopotamia. Ptolemaic control began around 301 BCE. Indigenous communities maintained their own courts. Temple institutions retained authority over religious and civil matters, and the high priest functioned as the primary intermediary between Judea and Alexandria. The Ptolemies built one of the most sophisticated tax systems of the Hellenistic world. Judea, being mainly agricultural, was taxed through grain, oil, and wine production. The system placed greater pressure on rural farmers and strengthened elite families tied to the temple. During this period, the Hebrew Torah was translated into Greek, producing the Septuagint. The oldest Dead Sea Scroll fragments, including portions of Samuel, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Jeremiah, Ecclesiastes, and Daniel, date to this era. After a series of wars between the Ptolemaic and Seleucid kingdoms, Antiochus III secured a decisive victory at the Battle of Panium in 200 BCE, permanently ending Ptolemaic control of the region. Judea became part of the Seleucid Empire. According to the historian Flavius Josephus, portions of the Jewish community welcomed the Seleucid takeover after years of Ptolemaic taxation, assisting the Seleucid takeover by opening the gates and providing provisions for the Seleucid army. Antiochus III confirmed the rights of the temple in Jerusalem, granted tax reductions, and allowed Jewish law to continue in internal matters. However, the high priesthood now carried immense political and economic influence, leading rival priestly families to compete for the position. Under the reign of Antiochus IV's Epiphanes, internal tension intensified. The brother of the high priest Onias III offered the king a large sum of gold and promised to Hellenize Jerusalem if appointed high priest. He changed his name from Joshua to the Greek name Jason and established a gymnasium near the temple. Jason was later replaced by his advisor Menelaus, who offered the king even more silver for the position. These actions undermined the traditional legitimacy of the high priesthood and created a split between Hellenizing elites and traditionalist groups. In 170 to 168 BCE, Antiochus IV invaded Egypt. During the campaign, rumors spread that the king had died. Jason seized the opportunity to attempt a takeover of the position as high priest of Jerusalem. Antiochus returned and viewed the events as open rebellion. According to Maccabees, soldiers were ordered to kill whomever they met, with tens of thousands killed or enslaved. A Seleucid garrison was installed, and Hellenistic practices were encouraged, while traditional Jewish customs were mocked as backward. Antiochus soon issued the Decrees of Antiochus. These decrees banned circumcision, observing the Sabbath, obeying Jewish dietary laws, and studying the Torah. Copies of the Torah were burned. The Second Temple was desecrated when a pig was sacrificed on the altar and the temple rededicated to Zeus. Pagan altars were built throughout the region, and Judeans were forced to participate in sacrifices and pagan rituals, such as processions for the god Dionysus, and to eat pork against their will. Those who disobeyed these orders were often executed brutally and publicly, utilizing methods such as crucifixion, scalping, being burned alive in oil, mutilation, hanging, or being thrown from the city walls. Records of these events have been recorded by the Book of Maccabees, Flavius Josephus, as well as an account by Greek historians Polybius, near contemporary account, and Diodorus Siculus. In 2015, archaeologists in Jerusalem discovered the remains of a massive fortification believed to be the Acra. the citadel Antiochus built to garrison his troops and control the temple. They also located lead sling stones and bronze arrowheads stamped with a trident, the royal symbol of Antiochus IV. In the village of Modian, Seleucid officials ordered a village elder and priest named Mattathias to begin the sacrifice. He refused and declared that he and his sons would remain faithful to the covenant of their fathers. When another Jew stepped forward to perform the sacrifice, Mattathias rushed forward and killed him upon the altar, then killed the Seleucid official as well. He tore down the pagan altar and declared, "Let everyone who is zealous for the law and supports the covenant come out with me." Mattathias fled into the Judean hills with his sons and began a guerrilla campaign against Seleucid forces and Hellenistic Jews. Many Jews took to the countryside and began hiding in caves in the Judean wilderness to escape persecution. In 2022, archaeologists from the Israel Antiquities Authority, IAA, discovered a rare wooden box containing 15 silver coins in the Murabaat cave in the Judean desert that date to the reign of Antiochus IV. After his death in 166 BCE, leadership passed to his son, Judas Maccabeus. Judas achieved early victories at the Battle of Wadi Haramia and the Battle of Beth Horon. At the Battle of Emmaus, he attacked the Seleucid camp while their forces searched the hills for him. The turning point came at the Battle of Beth Zur in 164 BCE. The Seleucid forces retreated after news arrived that Antiochus IV had died. Judas marched on Jerusalem, captured the city, and cleansed the second temple of pagan idols. The temple was rededicated on 25th Kislev, the event now celebrated as Hanukkah. Shortly before his death, King Antiochus IV Epiphanes had issued a decree aiming to offer amnesty to rebels who returned to their homes by March 164 BCE and restored the right of Jews to live according to their own laws, stating they would be exempt from punishment and allowed to use their own food and observe their own laws. However, this was not an official reversal of the earlier decrees, and the fighting continued with the Battle of Beth Zechariah, 162 BCE. A force complete with war elephants that unnerved the Judean forces, they suffered a crushing defeat against the Seleucid army and Lysias. Lysias moved to capture Jerusalem, and the Jewish defenders were near surrender as a famine was currently underway when Lysias received word that a rival by the name of Philip had arrived at Antioch and was attempting to seize control of the empire. To quickly end the Judean war and return to the capital, Lysias, in the name of Antiochus V, issued a new decree that restored religious freedom, officially repealed of the original anti-Jewish decrees of Antiochus IV, and allowed them to live by the laws of their ancestors in exchange for ending their rebellion against the crown. Judas, however, was not inclined to surrender. The Seleucids insisted upon appointing a high priest of their own choosing, typically one that was loyal to the Greek crown, and the Acra still housed Seleucid troops and Hellenized Jews. Judas no longer only wanted religious freedom, and instead insisted on securing sovereignty for a Jewish nation. While many of his troops accepted the terms of religious freedom under Seleucid rule, mainly the Hasidians, others did not, leading to prolonged conflicts between the two forces. As a result, Judas found himself facing a massive force under the general Bacchides. The majority of his army fled, leaving him with roughly 800 remaining troops. Judas was ultimately killed, and the battle was declared a loss. What began as a desperate resistance against the policies of Antiochus IV Epiphanes had evolved into a sustained struggle for autonomy. Though the fall of Judas Maccabeus at the Battle of Elasa marked the loss of the revolt's most formidable military leader, His movements had already reshaped the political landscape of Judea. While neither Mattathias nor Judas would live to see the results of their efforts, their actions began a series of events and ideas that would ultimately cultivate into the resurrection of an independent Jewish nation, with the final surviving brother roughly 20 years after the death of Judas.
Spartans! What is your profession?